All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. It is Tuesday, and you know what that means. Time to continue our learning in our series, in our teaching, and our lessons, and whatever you want to call it, in the wisdom of Dr. David R. Hawkins' classic teachings on spiritual truth and enlightenment. And so it is frozen here today, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you are warm wherever you are. And thank you for joining me as always. And if you remember, it's been a while, so you may not, but we were beginning chapter 5 entitled Surrender. And in this chapter, it says here, we move beyond specific spiritual obstacles to perhaps the greatest challenge that faces any spiritual seeker, the willingness to surrender everything, including the payoffs, to the ego, to God. This sounds like it would be easy. After all, to surrender means to let go and not have to do anything. What could be easier? In truth, the process of surrendering is one of the most difficult steps along the path to enlightenment, or for those of us that are attempting to manifest or create, or I'll continue here, because of the tentacles of the ego. Even among the most spiritually inclined are deep and firmly entrenched. However, after reading this chapter, Dr. David Hawkins says, you will see why commitment to this surrendering process is more than commensurate with the demands. So, let us see where our mind goes for purposes of teaching and commentary and expanding the mind so that hopefully through an increased awareness and understanding of the nature of ourselves and spirituality and all of the subjects, that through this increased awareness or understanding or quote unquote enlightenment, we can increase the quality of our life. Because our life is made up of moments. And if we can increase the quality of our moments, then hopefully you know where I'm going with that. Now, we began reading the chapter a couple weeks ago, and so I will begin from where I feel inspired to. So once again, thank you for joining me, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. David Hawkins says, the first thing you notice about consciousness is it's automatic. The light of consciousness is automatic. It expresses as the watcher or the experiencer through awareness, the observer. You get the source of that faculty, and you'll see that that's an impersonal faculty, or it's an impersonal I. Now, this is always one of the deepest things, that you have your thoughts, but then you are the witness to your thoughts, and then you can be the witness to that awareness. And it's like, how many of me are there in there? So this is what he's describing here. It's consciousness expresses as the watcher or the experiencer through awareness. You get the source of that faculty and you see that it's an impersonal I. There isn't any personal you that decides to be consciously aware. There's just an underlying, and I'll add this, an underlying awareness that is always there. And so there isn't any personal you that decided to be consciously aware. Witnessing is happening of its own accord. In meditation, you pull back from identifying with the content of your thoughts. It says here the content of meditation. I am this, I did that, and all that kind of stuff. That's all fallacious story. You realize that that which I am is the witness of all those thoughts, feelings, and that panorama. He calls it, or he says here, I call it phantasmagoria. Stay with me if this is kind of deep, because there's always a great lesson to be learned in these pages of this wonderful book. Once again, The Wisdom of Dr. David R. Hawkins, Classic Teachings on Spiritual Truth and Enlightenment. He says, my great aunt used to have something that was really special for my birthday. She called it a monster polyphene. I said, what's that under there? She said, that's a monster polyphene. It would be something like a whole croquet set or something, a monster polyphene. Where is he going with this? The whole phantasmagoria that goes through the mind. So we often call it the monkey mind or the train of thoughts that's racing by that just seems to be popping in all the time. This whole phantasmagoria, he calls it, that goes through the mind, everybody who has meditated knows this. Memories, thoughts, fantasies, imaginations. You realize that what you are is the involuntary witness to all of this. So don't let your thoughts drag you down, because you're just witnessing it, and you can actually then consciously have some kind of influence. You realize that what you are is the involuntary witness. You don't volunteer to be the witness, you are the witness. No point to take credit for it. No point to feel ashamed about it, because it's automatic. See, that's one of those lessons there. No point to feel ashamed about it. A lot of us, I think, I mean, I'm just guessing here and rambling, and that's really what I do here when I read. And a lot of us, I think, we beat ourselves up, and we end up feeling negatively about ourselves because of whatever kind of thoughts that is going on all the time, whether it's memories or thoughts and imaginations and desires and regrets and all of this stuff that's always going on in our mind. We didn't volunteer to be the witness to all of this. We just are. So no point to take credit for it on one side, say, I'm a genius. Or on the other side, and I think most importantly for the majority of us, is there's also no reason, no logical point to feel ashamed about it, because it's automatic. Consciousness automatically is conscious because that's its nature and it's impersonal. That's part of our karmic inheritance, to be conscious. One begins to identify with the witness, Dr. David R. Hawkins continues, the observer, then with consciousness. Then one stops identifying that consciousness is personal, and one even goes beyond the manifest and realizes the ultimate God, what we, source, universe, what we all are a part of, this grand organized design, is beyond all form. So let me read that again. We begin with the witness, then we move to the observer, then with consciousness, then we stop identifying that consciousness as personal, and then one even goes beyond the material realm and realizes that the ultimate is beyond all of this, all form, beyond manifest, out of which consciousness arises. And that, he says, makes you a Buddha. The willingness to surrender positionality out of humility to God, or whatever name you use for it. Names, I think, are not important. So whatever humility that you choose to surrender to this great force means that one is then ready to accept the possibility that intrinsically men are innocent, men and women are innocent, and that they're suffering from a profound ignorance, and that the only way out of this suffering that we're stuck in with the nature of the mind and our dualistic physical. Remember, we have a dual nature. We are both mortal and immortal, spiritual and physical. And so the duality of the physical realm gives us this struggle, or maybe opportunity to learn. But he's saying here that we are innocent and that we're suffering from a profound ignorance. And the only way out of suffering then is to transcend that ignorance to a spiritual truth, as he puts it, maybe meaning a deeper awareness and understanding of the true nature of reality and ourselves and the connection between all of that. Once again, these are just my thoughts and opinions. If you disagree or agree, or this sparks something, then perfect.
Any of that is fine. Thank you for being here once again. And one becomes so the only way is to transcend this ignorance through spiritual understanding. Then one, I'm paraphrasing, then one becomes a student of spiritual truth in their personal life, or even eventually in their professional life. The relief for human suffering, David Hawkins says, then is what medicine is about. Psychiatry is about. It's why, he says, I went to psychoanalysis. Each one of those things was to sharpen the capacity to assist in the relief of human suffering and of all its forms. If you decided to that endeavor, one eventually ends up with spiritual truth and spiritual programs because to many human dilemmas, there is no other answer. I find this very interesting, this idea that you eventually, once you go through these things, whether it's, psychiatry or medicine or some trying to solve this deep issue that's at the root of each and every one of us, maybe some of us more than others, or maybe not all of us, but I don't know. I would think in each one of us, this, the want to the answers of the ultimate questions. That reminds me of a story about the ultimate question and the search for the answer to the meaning of life. And the question wasn't good enough. And so we need to ask really good questions and also question answers. Ladies and gentlemen, let me continue now. David Hawkins continues, quote, if you're dedicated to that endeavor, we end up with spiritual truth, spiritual programs, just like there's no other answer except to surrender to, he keeps saying God, but for some reason, this idea of surrendering to God sounds like you're giving up your will to something impersonal rather than allowing what is and attempting to be in harmony or connection or union. But see, even those imply some kind of separation. We are not separate from it. It's difficult with language. Once again, the words. So we try to force an answer, he continues, or force God to give us an answer with a demand. Many prayers are nothing but demands. We try to force God to respond to our demand, which is disguised as a prayer. I pray to such and such. He says, no, you were trying to force God to give you, he says, a new Ford or whatever it was, like it's a vending machine. You're just putting in tokens and like, ding, ding, please, that's not the concept. And we've gotten it wrong, whoever taught us this concept. But that is a different subject that goes back a very long time. However, he says, suddenly, when we actually can surrender to the force, to the flow, to God, to the Tao, we can see it differently. And that makes me think of when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. When you change your thoughts, change your life. Because what you experience is now different because of the way that you are taking it in. I wanted to say filtering it. Like your senses are like a filter as well as your perspective, your viewpoint, the way that you look at things. And if you don't know how to look at things in this new way, this more spiritually based way, more, I would say, harmonious way, let me continue. I ramble too much, but hopefully you get value. Thank you for even being here. Like I always say, I would be doing this by myself, but it's much more fun to make videos and do a YouTube channel because I want somebody else to be interested in this. I mean, it can't just be me, and I know that it's not. So, Sorry, we continue. When we can see this differently, and when we see it differently, we realize that there is no loss or no pain or all of the things that we experience. I'm not saying that it isn't there, but the source of this pain disappears, he says. And when the source of the pain disappears, the source came out of ignorance and came out of the way that we were seeing it. By constant surrender, see, I don't know if surrender and God are the right words here, but they give you a concept with this constant allowing to reality. Like it would be, as much as we do, a silly thing to say that this or that should happen or shouldn't happen. Like we're trying to control the universe and fate and destiny, like we are God. And from our tiny little perspective, that we should know the workings of all things. Any action can have a complex reaction. So I think that's the point he was getting at there. And every advanced and complicated thing tends to resolve itself in time. The best way to handle a prayer, he says, for a Ford, trying going back to the idea of manifesting here, the best way to handle a prayer for a Ford is to surrender your desire for it. Detach from the outcome. It's so funny, I've been thinking that a lot lately. The way, remember this, if you get anything from today's video, the way to get something to happen or to manifest or create an outcome that you desire through intention is through this allowing, this a detachment from the outcome, you say. And you might ask, how can you want something to happen if you don't have any connection to it happening at all? There is a difference between an intention and trying to force and push and not allowing. See, there's a difference between forcing and pushing and allowing. Be independent and detached from the outcome. The best way is to surrender because you think happiness is something outside of yourself when you're doing this. When you are, saying, I'll only feel good when I get this or when I get that. When we can bring happiness to life, I say this at the end of every one of these videos, and when we can change around our perspective and the way that we look at things and have this new awareness about ourselves and reality, then we can begin to see that we don't need to be praying for or chasing after. I'm not saying that praying is a bad thing. I'm just saying in this vending machine sort of sense, like, God, give me the goodies. What we really understand through this process of gaining a new awareness is we understand that happiness isn't this thing that we wanted that's outside of ourselves, but we already have it. And that's Alan Watts, I was listening to a week ago, said that. He's like, what's that, the one thing that we're always searching for? And we can never get it because we find that we already have it. But we don't want that answer. That's the ego saying, no, this isn't good enough. But we already are it. This may be too deep for some, so if that's the case, then that is just fine. Because we are thinking that happiness is something outside of ourselves. If I have the new Ford, then I'll feel successful and I'll finally be happy and complete. And see, that's the psychology of striving rather than arriving and allowing. We're always striving and pushing and forcing. Then when we get there, we won't know how to appreciate it and actually be there. And then when we do get the Ford, we won't actually feel successful and complete at all. I mean, we may feel a little bit for a while, but it wears off fast because we've never practiced being there in the moment, enjoying it. And if we can be there, this, goes back to what I started with. Our lives are made up of moments. And if we learn how through diligent practice and dedication and effort and more practice, and it becomes a lifestyle and a discipline that you can create quality moments for yourself. I mean, like I said, it takes some time to figure out how to do this, but how are you ever going to do it if all we're ever doing is striving and saying, all right, I'll be happy when I get there and when I get the, whatever it is, rather than appreciating where we are. I mean, this is it. This is life. We're here. Here we are. I say that. So the only reason I'm saying that is I say that to myself sometimes. I'll be working or whatever, and I'm like, this is it. Like we go through life so often feeling like, all right, like we're gonna reach some point or time or something, and like we're working towards something. Maybe it's just natural, you know, the way that our the way that we're wired. But this is it. We're here. We've already done it. Now, how can we enjoy it? It's I don't know what brought on that ramble, sorry. But hopefully you got something out of it. If the source of this happiness is within us, all right, all desires then have associated with them the unconscious belief system, back to the ego, that they will bring us happiness. All desires, I'll say that again, this goes back to the Buddhist philosophy that suffering stems from desire. All desires have associated with them an unconscious belief that this fulfillment of this desire will bring us happiness. And I mean, like I said, it may for a short time, but it wears off if we don't practice. But that makes us very dependent on the external world. See, I didn't know it was going to go here. And when we are dependent on things outside of ourselves for our happiness, then when it goes away, we don't have it. So if we can bring it to life, then we won't have to latch on. I mean, that's fine. We could use these things out here as bonuses, but when they go away, we still need to have it within. And remember, you can't give something you don't have. You can't give love if you don't have it within your own. So if the source of our happiness is in the external world, our happiness is always vulnerable and we live in fear all the time because the source is outside of ourselves. We are always in a state of weakened or possibly victim mentality position. And I haven't spoken about the victim mentality and mindset that we are programmed in society to kind of live with and look at life from this viewpoint that we're not empowered and great and divine and empowered is the best, I think, descriptor there for what I was getting at. But if the source of happiness is self-fulfillment within oneself, then nobody can take it away from you. The source of happiness. You reach a point when whether you physically live or die is really irrelevant. Many times you're looking death in the face, and if you leave, you leave, and if you don't, you don't, and it's no big deal. It's weird. When we get beset by a desire, we've set ourselves up for suffering, and therefore, if we are willing to surrender, allow, once again, to God, the Tao, force, grand organized design, we are all willing to surrender everything and anything, no matter what, even the greatest of things, then it's resolved. And something replaces it, but it's better than the new Ford would have been. Going back to, oh, if I only have that new truck or car or whatever, then I'll be happy, just as a weird example he was using. It's the future that's creating our present. You think your past See, we tend to think that it's our past. This is what he's saying. You think that it's your past that's propelling you forward from the past, like a boat. See, I didn't know he was going here either. But a boat has a wake behind it. And a lot of us live in suffering and struggle in our present because of our past. Now, the way Wayne Dyer talks about this is it's like a bag of manure that we carry around, or it's like the wake behind the boat. And he says, when you're sitting in a boat and you look out, little boat coming through here, and behind it, and you can see the wakes. Are the wakes driving the boat? And so the analogy is, should our past be driving our life? I'm not saying we don't learn from the past, but we shouldn't be pulling out of the quote unquote bag of manure and smearing it all over ourselves and saying, I'm, you know, whatever we want to, whatever self-deprecating things or self-defeating or self-victim mentality kind of things that we want to use. Once again, a lot of metaphors going on here, but the wake doesn't drive the boat. It is the motor and the engine. And it is us here now in the present. We can decide where boat goes, metaphorically again. So it's your future that's creating your present. We think it's our past that's propelling us from the past, that we're being pushed by it. This is back to David Hawkins' words. Quote, no, we are being, he says, sucked into the future. We are being pulled into the future. We're being pulled by destiny because by an act of the will, we have already chosen our destiny. And now this is the unfolding of what is required to reach it. And so from that perspective, you could almost just say, oh, it's just a ride. The old Bill Hicks quote, life is, it's just a ride. Thrills and chills and funny colors and ups and downs, but they try to tell us that it's just a ride, but no, it's just got to be real. You reach a point, all right, you're being pulled by destiny, and now this is the unfolding of what is required to reach it. Therefore, there is no point to complain about it unless we want to. I see the options there, the tables. You can do whatever you want, but I mean, wouldn't it be a, back to the moments, higher quality moment, higher quality experience overall if we chose a different route? But once again, we can do it if we want to. He says, don't feel guilty about complaining. You're totally allowed to complain. So if you don't like this video and you think, if you want to complain, you're totally welcome to it. How does one transcend the ego, ladies and gentlemen? Well, that's probably the ultimate question. But Dr. David R. Hawkins says, first of all, there is no such thing as the ego. There's only the tendency of these energies to form a structure. There is only a tendency, putting an emphasis on the word tendency. They can be easily undone. There's two ways. It goes back to the old words of thrice greatest Hermes, Thoth. There is two ways: meditation, contemplation. I would say those are one way. Rumination, ponderation, the thinking on, and once again, the allowing of the thinking on. Meditation, contemplation with prayer and devotion. Be one with reality. Be one with that which you are already a part of, God. He says the field. If you are, maybe that's a good way to think of God, this energy field. I mean, I've thought that before, but thought it good to say now. Be one with the field. If you are aware primarily, when I said field, I was thinking of like this energy frequency grid pattern that you can harmonize with and have resonance rather than dissonance with the field. And maybe when you can create this alignment with God, reality, this is when real magic becomes a possibility as far as creating, anyways, manifesting and all that. But that could be a deep ramble hole. So, if we are aware primarily, he says, of the field, wait a minute. If you are aware primarily of the field, see if your obsessive compulsive side gets so caught up in this thing here that it drives you crazy. He's got to know every little detail, which is totally irrelevant. Was your want? Did your lunch cost you $1.32 or $1.37? I don't know. Who cares? See, this is what I often think. Maybe I'm just naturally that way, kind of laid back and not too worried about little things like that. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna save 25 cents. I'm like, I don't even, but it's weird that he would come out with this example randomly. The I, the sense of the self, this is the vision of the totality. You live in the infinite space in which everything is happening. To be focused on, you might say, peripheral vision rather than the central vision is to be aware of the totality of the situation here. The entirety of all that's being here and the energy of us being here, and what that means for what should be said here and what should be heard and on speaks of its own. It's about the totality of the energy and the totality of beings here and their collective drive. That was an odd, deep paragraph there. We'll continue a few more and see where we feel inspired to stop, ladies and gentlemen. Wow, it's already a little past 1 o'clock here. I don't remember when I started this video. But once again, hopefully you're getting value. Thank you so much for being here. I thought I'd set the painting here so we could have a nice little, whoa, have a nice little background there. So let's see where it goes here. If you move around in the peripheral world, you're always focused on the totality of the situation, and unfortunately, you miss a lot of the little details. It's best to be married if you do this. Who tells you that you put the shirt on with the hole in the sleeve? Like, oh, geez, I thought she'll never see that. It's my favorite shirt. He says, in my spouse world, you cannot wear a shirt if it has a hole in it. Yeah, he has very random comments in this deep, deep subject, but that's just fine for me. Nobody notices it. Why? Because, so he's using this example. In my world, nobody notices it. Why? Because I pay attention to the field all the time. You can do the same thing in meditation where you're constantly aware of consciousness itself. The opposite way is to focus on the content of the mind. There is another form of meditation or contemplation in which there is an absolute fixity or focus on the immediate present as it arises with no selection. That's interesting. Recommendation: meditation with an immediate absolute focus on the present as it arises. That's a weird feeling to even think to do that for a moment. It's cool. I like it. However, intensely focused on the head of a pin constantly. You're staying intensely focused in the intense now. Peripheral and central vision, the retina is sort of set up that way too, with your focus on the macula or the field, the micro or the macro. Interesting. The details or the all, the duality or the oneness. That's what we were really getting at there. Intensely focused, but devotional non-duality, which is one of the subjects he's explained earlier in this series on my channel here. is this idea of devotional non-duality, or dedicated to living a lifestyle of non-duality. Non-dual thinking means that the love for reality, God, the universe, is enough that we are willing to allow, to surrender everything that stands in the way of the realization of the presence of divinity, which turns out not to be an other, not to be what we've always been reaching and searching for, but turns out to be ourselves, the self we already have. You thought it was going to be out there later, he says. It's a source of one's existence to come to the realization, the radical reality of subjectivity. Remember, there's the subjective viewpoints, and then there is the all. We take subjectivity for granted. We take the field for granted. We take consciousness for granted. And this is what we take for granted. This is what we think is important. This is what's trivial and irrelevant, and this is what we are. We ignore what we are in return for focusing on that which we are not, on that which is outside of us. And we need to stop doing that and begin turning around and focusing on what we are, what we already have, and then diligently begin practicing and creating yourself. What I mean by that is really thinking about your own thinking and your new ways that we can change the way that we look at things, and hopefully the things that we look at change. But I want to read that last little bit there again. We take consciousness for granted. We think certain things are important when really they're trivial and irrelevant, and it's just a part of who we are. And too often we ignore what we really are in return for focusing on that which we are not, on the duality, on the separateness and the things rather than the oneness and the connection, that we are a part of all of this happening. I keep looking at the plants over here, but any part of reality, we are a part of it. I mean, he says, how could you hear a bird sing? It's only against the background of silence. And I think I'll leave it there for today, ladies and gentlemen. There for today. This book is very interesting. It always goes in a wandering, meandering way through certain interesting topics. We're almost to the end of that section. The next one says spiritual awareness occurs by a revelation. Moving to the consciousness level of hope, the power of the mind, much, much more, ladies and gentlemen. But thank you so much for being here. I love and appreciate each and every one of you that spends time here with me on the channel with me and Dr. David R. Hawkins and Dr. Wayne Dyer and all the other wonderful authors and poets and mystics and sages of the ages, ladies and gentlemen. And yeah, just thank you. I really appreciate you being here. And until next time, remember to be, I was going to say be the change you want to see, but that's how I end the video. Until next time, remember that there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way. It is what we must create the ability within ourselves to bring to life. And then all the things, the same thing with enlightenment. All the things we've been telling ourselves, oh, when I get this, I'll be happier. When I learn this, I'll become enlightened. Or that becomes irrelevant then, because we are there. And then hopefully the entire journey is wonderful. And also remember to seek to achieve and maintain happiness through enlightenment, through a greater awareness and understanding of the nature of our reality, so that through that awareness we can increase the quality of our lives and the lives of those around us. And remember to seek to discover the lost wisdom of the ages and the mysteries of our history, ladies and gentlemen. As well, expand the description below the video to get yourself a link to the book so you can get it for yourself to put it on your shelf and follow along in future episodes or just for personal reference. And as well, a link to my Etsy shop, I believe, for my landscape paintings, and as well C60 Purple Power. Give yourself the gift of health. All right, now we can say it. Love you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you again. And as always, be the change that you want to see. Be the example that you want to set. No, 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 no.